the biggest battle that lay ahead of me was not with my body, but with my mind. I'm very, very pleased to be here. I've heard a lot about the Brixton Sangha, especially from Maitrinara, but also from the others involved here, including Pragna actually, who I live with at the moment. So I didn't realise, I'd forgotten about this actually, but apparently you just celebrated Parinirvana Day, and this is part of a series related to Parinirvana Day. So there's a number of connections I can make with what I have to say really this evening, and the celebration of the Buddha's passing away, or I should say commemoration really. And whenever I think of the Buddha's life, what really strikes me more than anything really is what happened in Kapilavastu when he was a very young man, possibly even a youth. You know, the traditional story is that he left home when he was 29, gained enlightenment when he was 35 and died when he was 80, or passed into parinirvana, as we say. But the early texts don't really support that. The classical account that the Buddha purportedly gave in a collection of discourses called Majjhima Nikaya, which is the Arya Pariyesana Sutta. In that text, the Buddha is described as leaving behind his aged and weeping parents. There's no reference to a wife, and there's no reference to a son. Also in the Sutta Nipata, which is the earliest text that we have in the Parivajja Sutta, which is basically an account of the Buddha's going forth from home into homelessness, he is described there by King Bimbisara, who encounters him as a youth in his prime. Well, you know, if you're 29, you're not a youth. Sorry, I hope I'm not giving offence to anybody, but for me, that term means someone probably in their late teens. So it is even possible that the Prince Siddhartha went forth at a very, very young age, and he was accommodated by later tradition with a wife and son for reasons to do probably with the prevailing culture in India at that time, to make Buddhism a bit more respectable, basically. But there's a likelihood, a possibility anyway, that the Buddha didn't have a wife and child. But even so, when he was perhaps only 18 or 19 years old, perhaps a little bit older, he left his comfortable home in Kapilavastu. He was the son of aristocrats, so he was obviously very well off. He had status, he had everything that he could have wished for in life, and yet he was dissatisfied. And what made him deeply dissatisfied was when he saw, seemingly for the first time, but certainly truly seeing for the first time, old age, sickness and death. Now I find that particularly striking because someone so young sees those things, really sees them, in other words, understands that one day he too will be subject to aging, to sickness and to death. Now these are the harsher realities of life which we're constantly protected from in our society, so that we don't have to come directly into contact with them. But he actually saw them as a very young man, as a youth, and decided that, well, basically there must be more to life than this. And of course, if you're familiar with the story of the Buddha, there was a fourth site, which is a site of a wandering ascetic, a sadhu. And he at once saw the significance of that there was a way out of this terrible situation that we find ourselves in, of continuous, according to the Buddhist tradition anyway, birth, death and rebirth, and all the pain and suffering that happens in between. Not, of course, that we're saying that the whole of life is just pain and suffering. It certainly isn't, as I'm sure many of you can testify. But I've had some wonderful moments in my own life, but it's very easy to forget the darker side of existence, the fact that sooner or later we're going to get old, probably going to get sick, and we certainly will die. And those facts have been brought home very, very forcibly to me in the last few years of my life, because just over 5 years ago I was diagnosed with quite a serious cancer and had to undergo really quite severe treatments. And my treatment actually lasted for 3 years. I went through chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and that took close on 7 months. And then I was on hormone therapy for 3 years. And now I am technically in remission, but that can change at any time because the cancer got into my lymphatic system and it could recur anywhere at any time. I've been warned several times by my oncologist. So being in remission doesn't mean to say that you're cured. So that this sort of the possibility of cancer hangs over my life not just as a theoretical possibility, it's a reality. The cancer is probably still in my system and could one day kill me. It could be very soon, it could be years later. We just never know with cancer, but you can never completely forget about it. So for me, facing this illness was a major wake-up call. Now, it wasn't as if I was unaware of the facts of old age, sickness and death. I have certainly observed old age at close quarters, and I've had friends, even young friends, die. I've had family members die. So I'm also familiar with death. And I've even had minor sort of illnesses when I was younger. The worst being, what's it called? It's related to chickenpox. Shingles. Whoever said shingles. Yeah, I had shingles down my face, which is pretty damn unpleasant. But that's the worst I ever had. So to be diagnosed with cancer is quite something else, it's of a different order. And I suppose I felt that somehow I was immune to cancer because I'd led a very healthy life. I've always been very, very fit. Well, no longer very fit, frankly. I've lost my fitness. I used to be a swimmer and a cyclist. But swimming was my main sport. And I can't swim anymore. That's all been taken away, as it were, by my cancer experience. I mean, I've gone to the pool, I know what to do. I wouldn't sink. But I certainly wouldn't be able to do 2,000 metres 4 or 5 times a week, as I used to do regularly until I was about 68, which is when I was diagnosed. So I can't do that anymore. So the reality of sickness hit home hard. And the moment that I was told by my GP that she's referring me for actually an urgent appointment at the hospital where I was eventually treated for suspected prostate cancer, I knew perfectly well that as far as she was concerned, it wasn't suspected. She knew damn well that's what it was. And I knew that she knew that. And I was convinced that must be what it was. And I knew that the situation was therefore very serious. And the first thing that struck me was that, and I knew this immediately, almost instinctively, if not intuitively, but one of the two, that the biggest battle that lay ahead of me was not with my body, but with my mind. And if I was going to come through this for the better, if I was going to be able to make the most of what remained to me of my life, then I had to remain in a positive frame of mind throughout. And I made every possible effort that I could to do that. And I think I was reasonably successful. I wasn't completely successful. You can't completely be happy all the time, even when you've got a serious disease like cancer. But I did my best. Apparently, Stephen Manis, who interviewed me recently for Buddhist Centre Online about the book that I've written, which is a full account of all this, he said that he remembered that at that time, on one occasion, I'd said, he'd asked me how I was, and I had replied, apparently, I don't remember this by the way, but that I'd never been so happy in my life. And I think that I can imagine that I might have said it. And the reason for that was that when you come so close to the fact of your own impermanence, your own mortality, you can't completely get away from it. It sort of opens up other sort of possibilities of experience, let's say. You somehow see the serious limitations of the situation that we're all very, very attached to, this life. It's not just its limitations, it's pain, it's suffering. As I said, not that there weren't moments of joy or happiness in my life. I've had many of them, but you can't completely escape from pain and suffering. And you start to wonder, well, what's the point? Not in a depressive kind of way, but I suppose you have a glimpse of the kind of vision which I imagine motivated the Buddha. But when he saw that the significance of the sadhu, of the wandering ascetic, he knew that man was in pursuit of truth, of ultimate truth, of coming to an understanding of the reality of things. And I think that you get glimpses of that when you're confronted by your own impermanence. And I'm not just talking about Buddhists. I've met some remarkable people, fellow cancer patients, who have had a similar attitude. I remember in particular, I recounted this in my book, an actress that I met, a former actress who's about my age, and she had a much more serious cancer than I had. She had metastatic lung cancer, in other words, a lung cancer which had spread to other parts of her body, and she's clearly in the final stages of her life. And I'll never forget the cheerful manner in which she talked about it, and the cheerful aspect she had, the sort of attitude that she brought to everyone that she talked to. And she said to me on one occasion, when you get something like this, it shifts your perspective on life. And that's what I also had found. But she clearly wasn't a Buddhist. She was someone who just somehow managed to perceive there's more to life than this. I can remember on another occasion, when I was still waiting to find out what my prognosis was, I had no idea for quite a long time actually whether or not my cancer had spread to other parts of my body. I think it was about 11 weeks before they were convinced that it hadn't, from the point at which I had that first meeting with my GP. And I remember, Matrinara might remember, that maybe you weren't there actually, come to think of it, but a group of us from Sikati one day went to Canterbury Cathedral, and it was a cold, bitter day, just like, well, even more bitter than today. It was damp and miserable. But I remember travelling on the train down to Canterbury and looking out of the window, a pretty dreary prospect. But suddenly I was overwhelmed by a sense of the world's problems aren't mine anymore. It was a great relief. Because the problems of the world are our problems as well. We can't ignore them. We can't get completely away from them. But in my own way, I suppose I try to do my best as an order member for the world in a wider sense. But suddenly felt to me like they were no longer my problems, and it felt a huge relief. It felt like a burden had fallen from me. It was a very, very surprising experience. So these are the sorts of things that can happen to you when you have a serious diagnosis, because you're confronted by potentially quite severe suffering, and also the fact of your own mortality, the fact that one day, perhaps not very far off, you're going to die. At least in my case. Now, in order to face these sort of darker sides of life, if you like, the darker realities that which are summed up by old age, sickness and death, or if you like, are the existential problems which ultimately we all have to resolve for ourselves. In order to really do that, you need to have a positive basis. You need to have a basis of positive emotion, which is one reason why we practice the Medabhavana practice, meditation practice. I'm sure that you're all familiar with that. I've been doing the practice now for almost 50 years, and I've often wondered, well, is it having any effect? Not always convinced. You sit there and wonder, is this working? And you still get that thoughts, years after years of practice. Dare I say it, after a few decades of practice even. But it dawned upon me not that long ago, certainly in my early 60s, if not before, that these practices are very, very subtle in terms of their impact. You sit down and do the Devamitra practice, you may feel nothing's happening, nothing's changing, but you do it. And you may find that perhaps, I hope certainly some of you have found, that you are a little bit more patient, a little bit less irascible if you're prone to that sort of thing, a little bit less impatient with yourself and with others and so on. You notice slight changes. And they don't necessarily become apparent when you're meditating. You don't necessarily get all blissed out with metta when you sit down and meditate on your meditation cushion. It's happened to me very occasionally, but believe you me, it's a few times in my life, not very often. But one day I just realised that I had changed quite radically over a long period of life, of time, and hadn't noticed it. Not really, not stage by stage. What had happened was that I did a 9-month solitary retreat, and the first thing I said to the first person I met when I came out of that retreat was, I think I may have just wasted the last 9 months of my life. He just laughed and said, I don't think so, Devamitra. And I think he was right. But it's like, in the thick of it, you can't see what's happening. I'm pretty confident that long retreat for me was a major turning point in my life. But I couldn't see it at the time. So why couldn't I see it at the time? Well, because, you go into this retreat and you sit there on the first morning and the next morning, doing your meditation practice, looking out across the beautiful valley that you look at, and enjoying all that. But it's the same day after day after day, kind of relentlessly the same. Nothing seems to change. Nothing too dramatic happens. Well, a few things did, but not that often. But certainly no major sort of breakthrough into Buddhahood or anything of that sort. It was just all very plain sailing, all a bit mundane. So it seemed to me at the time. But I think that what had happened was that, or what happens inevitably, you spend that amount of time on your own. So each day seems the same as the next one. Each week seems the same as the previous one. And each month even seems more or less the same. And so when you come to the end, you're just where you're at. And you can't get any sense of what the sort of territory you may have traversed in the intervening period. And it took me, I think, probably about a month to really realise that something quite significant had shifted in me. And the reason for why it took so long is because the changes were very subtle and happened really sort of minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month. And it's happening all the time. And there's a momentum to the change that's taking place. But it's quite subtle, and you don't notice it. And I think the same is true of our meditation practices. I'm saying it's more and more when I teach meditation. I think you've got to be patient with it. Don't expect dramatic results straight away. I certainly haven't had any. I've had, I can honestly say that I've changed for the better over the 50 years I've been practicing, but that change has been very, very gradual indeed. Maybe occasionally there seems to be some sort of dramatic breakthrough, although I've never had any really sort of cosmic one, like some of my friends have, who's very deeply into meditation in a way that apparently I don't. But these things affect you slowly and subtly. So all you have to do really is just keep on applying yourself. You do have to make an effort, but don't expect instant results. You can't just say, positive emotion, Alexa. It just doesn't come to us like that. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if it did? Maybe it wouldn't be, I don't know. It's probably not a good idea, but a positive emotion was something you just turn on like that. No, you can't do that. And unfortunately, we've been conditioned to want things immediately gratified. We want something, you hit the Amazon Prime, I don't know, button or whatever, and suddenly the next day it's there. Magic. I mean, that was completely and utterly unimaginable when I was a kid, growing up in Middlesbrough, just after the Second World War, playing on bomb sites and that sort of thing. Amazon Prime, the absurdity of it. You can get what you want just like that, within 24 hours. We were still living when I was a kid with food rationing. First 7 years of my life, there was still food rationing in this country. Certainly in the northeast of England. I don't know about London, wealthy London. But, we now live in a society where you can get everything instantly. And I think that conditions the attitude we bring to our Dharma practice, to meditation. You expect quick results. You won't get them. I'm sorry, but you just won't. You have to apply yourselves. You have to keep on applying yourself. Otherwise, you won't get the results. But you certainly will get the results if you persist. I think it's one of the big lessons that I've learned from life in terms of my Dharma practice. So you can take heart from me, if you like. It's not always been easy. In fact, at times it's been extremely tough. But you just keep on going. And another thing I've learned from life, and this links in very much with what I've written about in my book, it's been a major feature of my whole approach, and it's very traditional, and that is that it's really important to make the most of adversity. You will encounter adversity in life in all sorts of ways, whether it's illness, or you lose your job, you lose status, everything that you can lose, everything that you value, and you may literally lose everything. There are probably people in the Ukraine now who are losing everything. Their material possessions, their homes, their family, and so on and so forth. And that's not a novel situation. We've been in this situation throughout our entire history. The whole of human history is full of examples of this sort of thing. And that's something else that conditions the way we approach our life, especially in the West, in this country. We forget that many people have to live under the circumstances of war. Their lives are under threat. They don't know where they're going to be. They don't know sometimes whether they're going to be alive from one day to the next. They don't know whether they're going to get food from one day to the next even, or even water. And these are all things that we take for granted because we've got the water on tap, to use a silly metaphor. Anyway, you turn on the tap, water comes out. Doesn't always happen in India, I can tell you. I've had that experience many times. You turn on the tap, and sometimes you can be lucky if any water comes out. Especially at Nagaloka, where I've done quite a bit of teaching. You go in for a shower, turn the shower on, there's no water. Nothing happens. Nothing happens because someone's forgot to turn the pump on. Or there's an electricity cut, as there frequently is all over the place in India. So you've got no water. You might have no water for several hours. I remember even on one occasion, I went to our retreat centre in Baja, and I was told that there'd be no water for 7 hours. And people were arriving for a retreat from all over India to take part in this retreat, and they were told there'll be no water for 7 hours because someone forgot to fill the tank, turn on the relevant switch. And there was a power cut at that time, so they couldn't fix it. They knew the power would come back on a certain time, because that's the way they do things in India. But we had to wait. So, we don't have to think about those sorts of things. The harsher realities of life for people are in less fortunate circumstances to those which we have taken for granted. But I think if you practice the Dharma, you learn to value these difficult situations. we may not suffer in that kind of way. Suddenly you've got no water or whatever, or no electricity, especially in the hot season. That's a big problem for people, because it means their fans won't work, and they can't cool down, especially in a place like Nagpur, where the temperature can rise up to 48 degrees. It's pretty hot. So we don't have to contend with that, but we do have to contend with all sorts of disappointments in life. The kind of disappointments I imagine you're all familiar with. I mentioned like not getting a job that you want, or losing your job. There are countless examples. All the disappointments that make up a human life. We all have them. Without exception, there's no human being who does not suffer. It doesn't matter how powerful they are. It doesn't matter how wealthy they are. They can't escape it. We can't escape it. And what we have to do with that as Buddhists is to meet it positively. In terms of the tradition, in terms of the mind trainings, make the most of adversity. So I try to use that, bring that kind of attitude to everything in my own life, actually. Certainly it was not a new idea to me when I was diagnosed with cancer. When I was young, when I was working in theatre, you get used to the terrible humiliations that you have to sort of suffer as an actor, because there's always things that go wrong on stage, whether you're performing or whether you're rehearsing, which can be deeply humiliating. Recently, I was teaching we had a Dharma course for young people at Astana. I was teaching there for a week, and one of the young men on the course was finding things very, very difficult, and he was avoiding the group. And anyway, he turned up one morning, and there was a kind of reporting in session, checking in session, and he explained why he had been avoiding the group, why he'd been just sort of disappeared over the weekend. Nobody knew where he was. Suddenly he was back there, and there were clearly tensions which weren't being talked about amongst them, but one of the things he said was, I said, look, why don't you just talk about the things that are on your mind? Why don't you just be open about it? And he said, well, he's worried in case he shouts at somebody. I said, well, you can shout at me, I'm used to it. You've got to face the sort of difficult sides of life and make the most of them. In fact, even use the obstacles that seem to be in your way to help you reach higher, for a higher goal. And I think that's the whole spirit behind what I would call making the most of adversity, welcoming the bad experiences in life. It's a very, very difficult lesson to learn, but if you can learn from it, you'll lead a much happier life than if you don't. So when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was well prepared. I brought this attitude to bear many times in the course of my life, even before I became a Buddhist. I think that was my attitude even when I was working as an actor, because it's a pretty tough world, that one. And to succeed, you've got to be pretty tough. And I was determined to become pretty tough. And the only way you can become tough is by, in Buddhist terms, making the most of adversity. And if you want to make significant spiritual progress, I would say also you need to become pretty tough. I don't mean physically, I mean mentally. Which is why we have to engage with such difficult practices as the metta bhavana. Because the metta bhavana will help you to toughen. Because the best defense against any kind of misfortune is metta, maitri. Because you can reflect upon it. If you've got a basis of positive emotion, you can just reflect. Samsara always goes wrong. You even find it amusing. Sometimes when it's even painful. You can bring that attitude to bear. So the way to toughen up is not the obvious way. The way to toughen up is do lots and lots of metta practice. Well, that's one way anyway. And then when these difficult moments in life come to you, you can meet them full on and be happy to meet them and know you've got a challenge. and face it and try to succeed with the challenge. So again, coming back to my cancer, that was for me a big challenge. I took it in that spirit. I knew it was a challenge and I had to deal with it positively. I could not afford to let myself drift into negative mental states, because if I did that, I would just sink, as many people do. But anyway, yes, that's what we have to try to do to all the difficult situations that we encounter in life. So that's one of the themes in my book, one of the main themes I would say. So as you can gather, the main reason I'm here, partly why I'm here, is to try to bring your attention to this book, because it's a major part of my life, and I think it's a book which will help many people. In fact, I know already that I've already had some very, very positive feedback from fellow cancer patients who've read it, and they found it extremely helpful. But I didn't write it just for fellow cancer patients. I wrote it for Dharma practitioners. I wrote it even for anybody who has been touched by cancer in any way, whether they treat the cancer of other people, whether they have relatives who've died of cancer, and nowadays most people do have, and so on. But I've tried to present my experience entirely from a Buddhist perspective, and you can get some sort of feeling for that from what I've said here this evening already.
Great, so I hope you enjoyed that Dharma talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist Community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And if this was a class, a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving, you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set up a standing order, a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that, and that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.